Friends, welcome again. Today we want to do a critical analysis of the poem The Ballad of Father Gilligan. And this poem is written by a modern poet of the 20th century English literature, W.B. Yeats. Friends, we know that if we want to do a critical appreciation or if we want to do an analysis of a poem, generally we begin with the author, the poet, okay? Then we talk about his or her major works, okay? Then we talk about the theme of the poem, the basic idea that the poet wants to express. Then we will analyze the poem stanza wise. We also talk about the meter, some poetic devices used by the poet. Okay, so friends, let's begin with some biographical details about the poet W.B. Yeats. Friends, the full name of this poet is William Butler Yeats. He was born in 1865 and died in 1939. So you can understand that Yeats was a modern poet of the 20th century. Most of his works are published in the first half of the 20th century, and he belonged to Ireland, and that's why we consider him as an extraordinary Irish poet of English literature. Friends, Yeats' father was also a known poet, a known painter, John Butler. Okay, and Yeats also learned this art of painting when he was a teenager, but he found that he had more qualities of a poet than a painter, and that's why later on he built his career as a poet, not as a painter. Okay, and he became a very important poet of modern English literature. All throughout his lifetime, Yeats published over 30 poetry collections. He has written hundreds of poems, and all these poems are published in different anthologies published during different times. Okay, but the major works, very important works of W.B. Yeats are The Tower, Words for Music, perhaps, and other poems, The Second Coming, and all others. And these are the most influential poems of the 20th century. The most important thing to note about W.B. Yeats is that he was also awarded the Nobel Prize of Literature in 1923. Okay, now let's talk about this poem, The Ballad of Father Gilligan. This poem, as the title itself suggests, is a ballad. Okay, it is written in 12 stanzas of 4 lines. You know that every ballad is written in quatrains, and quatrain means a stanza of 4 lines. Okay, now ballad generally narrate the story, right? It is an old form of expression. In the ancient times, when we are in one of my previous videos, we have discussed that ballad is a very old form. In the ancient times, ballads used to exist in the oral tradition, and ballads are mostly narrative. Okay, they narrate some story about some heroes, right? So in this poem also, W.B. Yeats has narrated a story of a priest called Father Gilligan. Okay, the central idea of this poem is about the presence of God everywhere and his love for all. Okay, the poet wants to suggest that God is everywhere and God belongs to all. This poem is about a miracle which happened in the life of Father Gilligan, who is an old priest. Okay. Now let's start to understand the poem stanza wise, right? This poem, as I told you, is written in 12 stanzas. Each of these stanza is again made up of 4 lines. So total there are 48 lines. Okay. If I read the first stanza, the old priest Peter Gilligan was weary night and day, for half his flock were in their beds, or under green sods lay. This is the first quatrain, the first stanza. Okay, you mark the rhyming scheme, the last words of each line: Gilligan, day, beds, and lay. That means day and lay are rhyming. So the rhyming scheme of this stanza is A, B, C, B. In the same manner, you mark the first line. Okay, the sound pa is repeated 2 times. So it is an example of an alliteration. Alliteration is a figure of speech in which some consonant is repeated, right? In the same manner, in the third line, there is again an alliteration. The sound her is repeated 2 times. If I talk about the meaning of this stanza, here the poet introduces the old priest Peter Gilligan, who was feeling tired with the passing of every day and night. Why? Because most of his people in his area, they were either sick or they were already dead or buried. Okay, all for half his flocks means people, were in their beds. In their beds means they were very sick, they were ill, or under green sods lay. That means or they were buried or they were died. So Father Gilligan was working day and night. He was living a very busy life, and that's why he was very weary. If you come to the second stanza, once while he nodded on a chair at the moth hour of eve, another poor man sent for him, and he began to grieve. Here also the rhyming scheme is A, B, C, B. And in this stanza, the poet wants to say that one evening when Father Gilligan was feeling sleepy, he nodded on a chair. That means he was feeling sleepy at the moth hour of eve. Moth means some insects. Eve means evening. Okay. During the evening time, when the insects start coming, at this time, someone calls him and he becomes so distressed. He began to grieve. He becomes disappointed. Why? Because he did not have time to sleep. He was living a busy life. Stanza 3. I have no rest, no joy, no peace, for people die, and after cry he, for God forgive, my body spake, not I. Here, Father Gilligan is living a very busy life in the service of his people, and that's why he complains to God that I have no rest, no joy, no peace. I have no happiness, no mental peace, and no rest. People die, and Father Gilligan's job was to go to the people who are sick, okay, to treat them, to accompany them, and when they die, he has to be there. at the in the final this thing when they were buried. Father Gilligan here feels that since people keep on dying, since he is expected to be with them in their last hours, he is not getting any rest. He has no reason to feel happy and he has no peace of mind. However, he apologizes in the last two stanzas. He says, God forgive, my body spake, not I. He apologizes to God by saying that, it is his body, it is his tired body which is complaining, not his soul. Okay. In the next stanza, the poet writes like this. He knelt and leaning on the chair, he prayed and fell asleep. And the moth hour went from the fields and stars began to peep. Here I have shown some words in red color in order to show you the use of iambs, right? Iamb is a food in which there are two syllables. The first one is unstressed and the second one is stressed. If you mark these words, the first line of this stanza, he knelt in, this is one foot, okay, this is one iambus, and li is another iambus, ningon, third iambus, the chair, this is the fourth iambus, right? So it is written, the first line is iambic tetrameter line, in which the syllables knelt, li, on and chair, these are stressed syllables. In this stanza, Father Gilligan kneels down on the ground, putting his folded hands on the chair before him. He is so tired because of his too much work that he tries to take some rest. While praying in that position, he falls asleep. Okay, and the evening time finished and the night falls. In the next stanza, the poet writes, they slowly into millions grew and leaves shook in the wind, and God covered the world with shade and whispered to mankind. Here also you mark there is a use of alliteration where the sound wa is repeated 3 times, right? Okay, here the poet describes how God has brought night to the world. The sky is filled with stars and the wind shakes the leaves on the trees, right? And God has covered the whole world with darkness. So the poet here describes night, and the poet wants to say that it is now midnight. Okay, now next stanza. Upon the time of sparrow chirp, when the moths come once more, the old priest Peter Gilligan stood upright on the floor. Sparrow chirp means, the birds, they make some beautiful noise in the morning. So the poet wants to suggest that it is the time of morning now, early morning, right? So sparrows had begun to chirp and the swarm of moths come back once again. Moths means the insects. Suddenly Father Gilligan wakes up and stands up straight and ready to do his duty. In stanza number 7, the Irish words you find, mavron, these are Irish words. They mean a kind of sadness, a kind of exclamation, what we say alas in English, right? So alas, the man has died. While I slept on the chair, he roused his horse out of its sleep and rode with little care. Father Gilligan, all of a sudden he realizes that he has missed his duty, and the man who had called him the previous night, he must have died now. He feels that he has actually disobeyed his duty. He has not done his duty in the manner he should have. Okay, so he realizes that he has disobeyed God. He takes his horse and now starts riding it to reach the home of that person. Okay, in the next stanza, stanza number 8, the poet writes, he rode now as he never rode by rocky len and fen. The sick man's wife opened the door. Father, you come again? Father Gilligan rides very fast, and when he reaches that particular house, that sick man's wife opens the door, and to his surprise, the sick man's wife tells, Father, you come again? Actually, Father Gilligan reached there for the first time, not again. So, Father Gilligan realizes that before me, God already had visited this house. So, he realizes that God is omnipresent, right? In stanza number 9, the poet writes, and is the poor man dead? He cried. He died an hour ago, the old priest Gilligan in brief swayed to and fro. Now this line, the old priest Peter Gilligan, is a refrain, right? Many times this line is repeated by the poet. So the repetition of the line is known as a poetic device known as a refrain. Father Gilligan here in this stanza asks the sick man's wife whether her husband has passed away, and the wife answers that he died an hour ago, right? Father Gilligan is so unhappy to hear this, and he cannot now stand steadily. In stanza 10, when you were gone, he turned and died as merry as a bird. The old priest Peter Gilligan, he knelt him at that word. Now mark the use of a figure of speech, simile, as merry as a bird, right? This is a simile in which a person is compared to a bird. Okay, and the old priest Peter Gilligan, this is an example of a refrain. Here, the sick man's wife tells Father Gilligan that after he had left, her husband died a happy death. But the Father Gilligan kneels on the ground, and he is surprised because he had not actually visited. Instead of him, in place of Father Gilligan, God himself visited that house, right? So that's why he is surprised. In stanza 11, he who has made the night of stars for souls who tire and bleed, sent one of his great angels down to help me in my need. Father Gilligan realizes that God, who has created this starry sky, the sky full of stars, to make us happy, okay, and to comfort the souls of the sick people and the dying people, means he is talking about God. That same God must have sent one of his angels to take Father Gilligan's place at the bedside of the dying man. The job of Father Gilligan was to accompany the sick people, okay, the people who have fallen sick, and to accompany those who are dying. That was the job of Father Gilligan. And in this case, Father was asleep, and that's why he could not reach the house. So instead of that, Father Gilligan realizes that instead of me, in place of me, God had sent some angel of his own to do that duty. So this was a miracle in his life. In stanza number 12, the last stanza, He who is wrapped in purple robes with planets in his care had pity on the least of things asleep upon a chair. Here, Father Gilligan says that God is a king who is wearing purple costumes, and all planets, the whole universe is under his command, right? However, he is so merciful, he is so pitiful that he worries and takes care of all his devotees, right? So, the theme of this poem, of this ballad, is that God has mercy for everyone. God is omnipresent. Omnipresent means God is everywhere in each and every object of this world. This ballad presents a very simple story of a miracle which took place in the life of Father Gilligan. Through this ballad, the poet wants to express the idea that God is omnipresent, God is everywhere. Okay, God takes care of those who are his true devotees. One who serves God with utmost sincerity, with complete sincerity and devotion, he is always loved and cared by God. So, in short, we can say that the theme of the poem is God helps those who help others, right? So, the whole idea that W.B. Yeats wanted to present here in this poem is that we must do our duty with utmost sincerity and honesty